Glory to Jesus Christ. Christ is in our midst. We decided we will also start a little bit different format, a more, let's say, relaxed format. Maybe the quality will be a little worse, but this way we can do videos more regularly and just give answers to very short questions. So today we'll cover 2 questions.
Yes, the 2 questions are, good day. First, why is the question of Catholicism versus Eastern Orthodoxy and all that stuff even relevant in Russian public discussion? Or it's just a hipster stuff, just probably as hipster as this picture. No. First, what does it give? So the question I came across lots of time is what does it give to you and what shall it give to Mother Russia?
Yeah, I think this question comes often, all the dogmatics aside, because for most people they realize you can argue both ways and you can argue until the end of time. So what they want to know, what gives, why should I care, why become Catholic when the majority isn't? So you can come from this from different points of view, of course, but 2 things I can say, especially in the context of young people, is to remember your rebellious side, kind of, to realize that being part of the majority, quite frankly, is not that cool. I mean, I would appeal to young people, obviously, like that. And of course, this works the same way when a young Orthodox, when a young American WASP guy becomes Orthodox somewhere in Texas, it makes him feel like...
Things happen,
Yeah, it makes him feel like an...
but that's
like
kind of cheating. It's not.
Yeah. So that's not right. Exactly the point, right? But it does appeal as I don't remember who was talking about it about Christianity in general being like this kind of rebellious adventure, because remember how Christ, I think it was Patrick Coffin with Dr. Taylor Marshall, they were talking about this. I don't remember who they were referencing, but that when Jesus came to the fishermen, he said, come with me. Almost like Schwarzenegger, come with me if you want to live. So they dropped everything, abandoned their father and just left, right? So oftentimes when people, the reason why I'm talking about this is that for a lot of people, it's the question of like, well, life will be uncomfortable, kind of. If I become Catholic and most people aren't, I'll be like strange guy and all that stuff. So in those cases, I would obviously appeal to, that should never stop you from anything.
But what is it that drives you to this direction?
Right, so
before you ask yourself about the costs, the expenses, you kind of should have something.
Yeah, so to me, like in Christianity in general, it's freedom. It's to be able to free yourself from, again, if we leave dogmatics outside. Obviously, the question of, believing correctly is, first and foremost. But I mean, in this cultural context, I would say it's the freedom from here and now, kind of your cultural specific context. I don't mean that you become like a spiritual Christian that has no culture or anything like that. What I mean is you can be whatever you want, but there is a certain unity in being Catholic, that all around the world you'll find Christians that believe exactly the same thing, that submit to the Pope, or they're in communion with the Pope, and they're free from here and now in this dogmatic and spiritual context.
Do you mean that the Pope himself is kind of the factor that helps us to transcend
Yes, so
our current Russian reality?
First of all, even the question of the fact that we're even thinking about, so I'm Russian, but I can consider other things, right away helps me to transcend something. But the point of Catholicism is always that there's a visible thing which is like an axis around which everything goes. Obviously, in the most highest sense, this is the cross of Jesus Christ. But then the visible head of the Pope brings all this difference, all this variation and diversity together around the same axis. You know, the Rome, and then of course the Pope himself, the See of Peter, and also this will allow you to appreciate your own culture, your own church tradition. I don't mean dogmatic in terms of dogmatics, but I mean like Eastern Catholicism, you know, like Syriac context, or Indian context,
Slavonic
or Slavonic or Ethiopian.
Case.
Yeah, or Slavonic in our case. It helps you to appreciate your own much more, because you're not looking from it like a given. You see
its position within the system,
right?
Among other rites, among other traditions.
Right. You will be able to get like a bird's eye view of it, right? So you transcend all of it at the same time, but because a human is not a body or a spirit, spirit is always embodied. So this transcendent kind of realm helps you to kind of, that's the life of the spirit, where the culture, you transcend your culture, whatever cultural limits there are, and then there's just Christ, His church. You know, it's hierarchical structure. You can go into like the whole pseudo-Dionysius, you know, hierarchy of celestial bodies, and not bodies, but I mean like angels and humans, and how they all fit into this cosmos. But then in the end, you can't just be, you know, this abstract thing. You have to embody something. And so this bird's eye view helps you to realize, here's my context, here's my culture, here's my tradition, particularly.
But I am not trapped in it.
Exactly, exactly. So it's like with body, you know, when I die, the entirety of human is soul and body, but when I die, my spirit still lives, even when my body dies. So in this case, obviously, I don't believe the body, you know, if we extend the metaphor to Eastern Catholicism, I don't think the body will die, but I'm just saying I'm not limited to that. But now I can appreciate more my own tradition, and I think here it's where you can kind of talk about, I would say, second question, right? So transcending, that's great, you know, some people can understand that, but then now practical, you have to embody something. So why not just remain, let's say, Roman Catholic in whatever country? Why do we even bother with all these rites and traditions? We can have just be Latin Catholics, then there are Eastern Orthodox doing their thing, we do our thing in our own tradition, and just forget about this UNIAT, you know, Eastern Catholicism stuff.
Yeah, I would cover partially this question. Actually, from my perspective, there are two questions, so practical question and well, actually, any theoretical question is practical enough if spoken about. In fact, so the very practical and true-to-life thing that attracts young people, among others, but mostly young people, that's important, to Catholicism is the chastity stuff. It's sexual morality and moral theology. Because, as you know, Russian Orthodox Church is pretty allowing in terms of sexual behavior and sex out of wedlock and civil marriages and all that, and divorces also. They have 11 official causes for reasons to divorce.
And let's say not sex out of wedlock, but the way they treat civil unions
out of sacramental marriage,
yes.
probably, yeah. That's be more precise. Okay, and chastity. That might seem surprising that young people get interested in into such stuff.
Yeah.
But we really have this kind of revolution. We are having now this revolution going in young minds about chastity, about reasonable sexual life, and about dignity of a human soul and human body.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why people are coming from very hard and very rough surroundings, fed up with occasional sex.
Mm-hmm.
Seeing that there is an institution which has experience enough to explain and to guide to a normal life.
Mm-hmm.
That's first very crucial point. And also complexity. Well, if we dare using word intelligentsia, so the young minds who are about to change the old minds, those Soviet minds of our country, in probably in 5 or 10 or 15 years, they think in different language, in different set of oppositions. They do not speak in terms of East or West, in terms of political right or political left. They speak rather in terms of simple, complex, true, false, in rather philosophical manner. I can see this so being led to metaphysics. Yes, they invest less personality into current politics. They do not discuss what Putin, Obama, Trump, or whoever did, has ever done. But they think of religion, think of the future of European civilization. And one of the questions they think of is Orthodoxy versus Catholicism. And that's not purely my point of view. This is the observation of Dmitry Bykov. I don't know if you should know him. It's a Russian famous author,
publicist,
and publicist, so quite prominent.
Yeah.
And poet also.
Mm-hmm.
So he said that his pupils, and he's a teacher in a private school, are interested in the questions why Orthodoxy or why Catholicism is better. So that's his words. And why? Because young people feel uncomfortable in this closed law resolution paradigm, not updated for a long time, which Eastern Orthodoxy can provide them with. And they want something more complex and more developed. And here is the Catholic Church, which can offer young people good ways of thinking and good paradigms, high resolution theology. And that's why people really do think and are interested in such questions, which sometimes may result, and it does, in conversions.
Right. And so then how do you go from here to Eastern Catholicism? So why going into Eastern Catholicism if Latin Catholicism can give you, all that stuff without all the unnecessary, baggage of like fasting and long services and all that stuff?
Well, for some people...
Is it only for two people?
For some people, it's okay to go to Latin Catholicism and to get rid of all that Eastern stuff, to get rid of those memories of this old, stupid, not developed orthodoxy, but some people, probably a little bit more careful in their reasoning, see that this point of view and this way of thinking is kind of the same they used to have, or the same as the culture promotes. It's actually very 19th century stuff.
Mm-hmm.
When you
Connect.
yes, when you just connect the national identity or or political views
Yeah.
with your religious life and with your rights.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I convert into Catholicism. That's why I must be Latin. I must not make signs of cross with this way.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
I must do it this way or this way, because I am not Russian anymore, and that's the point. Probably those people, so not all of them, but I really do know people, young people coming to Latin Catholicism, trying to keep the distance between themselves and their culture, and their national identity, and probably a shift in a national identity also takes place, but that's not 100%, because
Yeah, I have to intercept even here is that they will have to either adapt a different cultural identity, and in St. Petersburg, in Russia mostly it's either Polish, Lithuanian, which they aren't and they will never be what they're not.
or French,
Well, or French or Spanish or
sometimes
whoever.
British.
Yeah, but in those cases, usually they're even further from integrating into that culture. I mean, some people are more or less successful, but it's still kind of strange. You really have to stop being what you are. It's like men who think they're girls kind of thing. But, or they have to form their, like, a new Russian identity of what Russian is, and then they have to more or less abandon at least most of the Russian history, go straight to the 18th, 19th century with the appearance of first, westernizers who, kind of flirted with the idea that Catholicism, or Latin Catholicism to be more precise, was the better choice for Russia kind of thing. And then they construct their own kind of identity, but the problem is that it has no real roots in anything that can connect with the masses of Russians.
It does, so this policy and this way of thinking does have its roots in history. So the history of Russian Latin Catholicism is not, so poor.
Yeah.
It lasts for centuries.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact is that it does not allow us and does not allow the Catholic Church to spread among the masses, the Russian masses, and lots of Russian people, including the young people.
Mm-hmm.
And those coming to Eastern Catholicism, trying to preserve their liturgical habits, the liturgical rites, and the way they fast, they have this chance to transcend the national, but never losing it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's probably the answer. That's why. So I do not believe that those questions, religious questions, are completely irrelevant. Of course, you may say so because the Russian religious discourse has been marginalized for decades.
Yeah.
Well, the Soviet experience and post-Soviet, post-traumatic experience.
Mm-hmm.
But I really think that this discourse and this kind of discussion, this agenda will prevail and will just grow,
Mm-hmm.
because, partially because we love literature and we love philosophy. And probably we do it, we love such things because we have not so much social and political agenda interesting or relevant or somehow connected to our life, everyday life. So we have fewer choices in one kind of spheres, but more choices in other kind of spheres. And that's why it is relevant. So,
All right. Lastly, I wanted to say a few things about, as Maxime mentioned in the beginning, about the whole hipster issue, is that usually people in Russia who won't become, we kind of talked about it in the pilot episode, but nevertheless, they end up either kind of going the whole Tridentine kind of route, right? And it's not let's say it's not viable that much in Russia because again you have to adapt a whole different kind of cultural perspective instead of your own, or you abandon cultural perspectives in general, which is at the same time is susceptible to like modernism and certain theological liberties, let's say, that a lot of young Catholics allow themselves.
Yeah.
Because in both cases, it gives them a chance to kind of get creative, let's say, with themselves.
but probably we should talk more precisely about traditionalist stuff and modernist stuff in another video.
Yeah, sure. So, but in general, what I mean here, why I included here, is that kind of Eastern Catholicism, I think, in our context, allows you to stay grounded, not to go into some fantasy land. Accept where you are, who you are, and then work from there for all the things that all Catholics are united around, but in our own kind of particular manner.
Yes, that's it. Well, thank you very much for your attention.
Glory to Jesus Christ.
Amen.